Hi everyone, it's Frank here from DroneZone.uk. This is the first audio-only podcast that I'm going to put out. I'm still going to upload it to YouTube, but there won't be any video that goes along with it. I really wanted to get to grips with just doing an audio podcast. It's a lot easier, so that I'm not having to edit a lot of video in post-production and change the camera angles and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to test it out. I'm still very new to podcasting myself, so I wanted to see what it was like just doing an audio version that can be listened to. There's also a couple of times where, because I'm videoing most of the podcasts, I'm finding that when I listen to the audio version, there's some things that I've pointed out in video that I've not really explained properly in an audio fashion. So I'm still learning. Bear with me on that, and I hopefully will get a lot better at and sort that kind of stuff out. So that's the reason I'm doing this episode in audio only. Now, before I get into today's content, basically this particular episode is going to be some real important news regarding DJI drones. I'll come to that in a moment. I wanted to give a few shout outs first and foremost. Firstly, a big shout out to Buy Drone, aka Jack, who is a contact and friend of ours on Instagram. His username is at bydrone_. So that's BYDRONE_. If you check out the Instagram profile there, you'll see some fantastic content, very much in keeping with the kind of content that you will see on our feed as well. So there's some excellent real estate shots. There's some sporting videos. So it looks like he has really put his drone through its paces. There's all sorts of coastal footage. There's landscape, cityscape, loads of stuff. So check out bydrone_, for great content, like I said, and be sure to follow him. He, I believe, is using the Mavic Pro, and you'll see the quality of the footage that he's putting out is top notch. So kudos to him. I also wanted to give a shout out to Drone Life. I'm just going to get their username for Instagram. Basically, I go onto the Drone Life website every now and then to check out for news stories and whatnot. I've found that Drone Life tends to be a real good source for up-to-date information. And the story that I'm going to discuss today is actually one that I had linked to on the dronelife.com website. So if you're not already acquainted with that particular website, make sure you get acquainted. It's a fantastic resource for news and like I said, up-to-date information. And you can find them at www.dronelife.com. And yeah, so without further ado, the news story is basically, it caught my eye because the headline was DJI Matrice 200s dropping out of the sky. So immediately, obviously, I clicked onto it. Now, originally, I seen this post or the news article on the Engadget website. So on doing a couple of Google searches, I found my way to the Drone Life website, as well as BBC News. So news of this is getting out there; it's filtering through. But if anyone who doesn't know what the Matrice is, it's a much bigger drone than your Mavics and certainly the Spark, and it's bigger than the Phantom range as well. It's more of an expert level kind of drone. It's used for film production and that kind of stuff. It's used for news and slightly bigger budget stuff. So there's a problem with them, and the UK CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority, has advised pilots to take extra care when flying the Matrice 200. Now, the CAA hasn't gone as far as to ground these particular UAVs. I don't think that they were far off, but basically they've put out a set of guidelines to make sure that the pilots that have got these particular drones are doing what is needed to get the drones back to airworthiness. So apparently the issue is, like I said, that these drones are in flight and all of a sudden they're dropping out of the sky. It seems to be an issue with the batteries, and more so a software issue, which is good news, because obviously, you know, if it was the batteries themselves, that could cause major issues, and mean that you'd have to, you know, send stuff back and take things back and all sorts of rigmarole. So the fact that it's a software and better still just an update that needs to be done, means that before you go out and start flying your Matrice 200 today, tomorrow, whenever, make sure you get the updates done. We are told by the CAA that so with the Matrice you have 2 batteries at a time. So when you're updating them using the DJI Assistant software, you need to update 2 batteries at a time. So they've said, you know, if you've got 10 batteries, for example, you will need to do this update 5 times. And they suggest doing the update with all of your batteries. You will need to, and then do a flight test with every pair of batteries as well, in order to make sure that there are no further issues. And also they advise, you know, do your flight test away from any third parties that are not involved in your operations and projects and so on and so forth. That's kind of a no-brainer, but I'll put it out there anyway. The West Midlands Police in the UK have grounded their fleet of the DJI Matrice 200. There was one of their aircraft that had suffered an unexpected power failure, and the drone just dropped straight out of the sky. I'm not sure how battered it was and if it survived at all. But yeah, they've taken the action to ground however many other quadcopters that they've got in their fleet. I'm not sure if they've just grounded the Matrice or if they've grounded all DJI drones, but I'm sure more news will filter through as this story you know, gets a bit older. So these issues are directly relating to batteries TB Tango Bravo 50 and Tango Bravo TB55. They only work in the Matrice 200 and Inspire 2 drones. So it's something to do with the firmware. There is a firmware update that you need to get onto every one of the or every pair of the batteries rather, And we advise that you do that straight away before taking your Matrice or Inspire 2 out. Like I said, I'm not sure if there's any effects that are kind of a risk to any of the Phantoms or, you know, Mavics or any other DJI drone. But if it is a firmware issue, then I'm a little bit nervous that it might actually be across the board. Fortunately for anybody that isn't a Matrice owner, unfortunate for anybody that is a Matrice owner, fortunately there's only stories of Matrices falling out of the sky thus far. So sorry for all you Matrice owners out there, but at least it is, you know, it's specifically relating to just the one model so far, and let's hope it stays that way, obviously. But if it doesn't, you will hear it from me immediately. I'm going to take the Phantom 4 out this afternoon and test out a couple of new techniques in a new area that I haven't filmed before. So touch wood, that flight will go hunky-dory. But if there's any issues whatsoever, I will be reporting them in another podcast later on. So if you want a bit more information on this from the CAA, not the CIA, you might get a different response from them. There is a news story on the CAA website. I won't read out the link because it's way too long. But if you go on there and just search for TB50 or TB55, it should bring up the news story in question, published on sometime yesterday. It was directly relating to in-flight power failures. And they've also issued a safety notice. I'll stick a link to the safety notice in the description in the YouTube posting. Take a look at that. There's a PDF that you can download, and it gives you some kind of description with guidance on what to do. So if you've got a Matrice, or if you're just interested in the story, to take a look at the BBC News website and the Civil Aviation Authority website. And like I said before, shout out to Drone Life. Have a look at their website too. They're a great source of news and up-to-date information. So let's have a look at what they've said about it. There's a small number of incidents in which Matrice 200 suffers complete power loss. Okay, so this is on the Drone Life website. According to the CAA, a small number of incidents have been recently reported where the aircraft has suffered a complete loss of power during flight, despite indications that there was sufficient battery. Interesting. In each case, this resulted in the aircraft falling directly to the ground due to the immediate loss of lift, with the remote pilot unable to control its subsequent flight path. The notice says the small unmanned aircraft were damaged upon impact, but the CAA has not received any reports of injuries to people or property. Well, I suppose understandably this is very worrying news, as Drone Life points out. It also points out that the last time there was a major manufacturer based issue was with the GoPro drone. I think it was the Karma. Let's have a look which one. Matrice 200 is obviously the current one. Doesn't say. I think it's the GoPro Karma drone that had this kind of issue, and it was a while back. I think it was like 2016 that happened, but it was a very similar thing, where their drones were just dropping out of the sky as well. So this kind of story has been seen before by drone pilots. Naturally, it doesn't matter if you've seen it once or 100 times, you're never going to want it to be your drone that's in the news for this kind of story anyway. But the Matrice is significantly bigger than the GoPro, which is also an issue because naturally, the bigger it is, the bigger the mass, and thus the heavier it's going to fall, and potentially the more damage it's going to cause. So I hope anyone out there with Matrices are coming out of these issues, hopefully relatively unscathed, and your drone's relatively unscathed as well. I'm sure that if there's any major damage done, there should be some line of recompense, perhaps from DJI, or if you're like me, you'll make sure that you've got drone insurance, which covers accidental damage and whatever else, for example, public liability we've got as well. Really important, certainly in situations like this, where if someone just happens to wander into your flight area and you haven't seen them, or you don't know they're there, and all of a sudden your drone loses all power and just drops out of the sky and whacks them on the head, you're going to want to make sure you've got some cover in place for that. So if you don't, first of all, I would suggest getting some cover before you take the bloody drone out, and make sure you keep the cover in place no matter what happens with the drone. Even if it smashes to bits, obviously you're going to want to claim. There are a few insurance companies out there that from time to time I do want to mention, because I've seen and worked with a number of the companies, so I know, generally speaking, which ones have got the widest reaching terms and whatnot in their policies, the best kind of premiums. I know, generally speaking, which insurance firms are good for paying out claims, which are the ones that tend to be a little, what's the word for it, a little more frugal in their payouts. And I think when you're dealing with drones that cost upwards of £1,000, if the worst does happen, you kind of want to make sure that you're not grounded for too long. And so let's just take an example. If I was to accidentally fly my drone into a brick wall and it was smashed into bits, therefore there's no real way of repairing the whole thing and getting it flight worthy again, I'm going to want a like-for-like replacement. When that kind of thing happens, you don't want an insurance company that's going to be umming and ahhing on whether or not the claim is valid, and whether or not you get a like-for-like, or old for new, that kind of thing. You want someone who is going to be on point when it comes to the claim process, on point when it comes to either paying out or issuing a replacement, and on point in terms of not messing you about. So I'm currently talking to a couple of insurance firms regarding sponsorship of the podcast. Being in insurance for the past 10 years, on the peripherals of insurance anyway, I've wanted to try and get some kind of bespoke white label insurance for our audience, our listeners, and members of our forum. So like I said, I'm in talks with a couple of firms right now, trying to get to the bottom of that and what is the best way forward with it. So I'll let you know as soon as possible on that note. And yeah, so just in the meantime, make sure you've got some damn cover, because you don't want to be going out and your drone's just dropping out of the sky onto people's heads, obviously, and you don't want to be coming back with a drone in a million bits either. So there you have it. That's a scary story, really. Certainly if you're a Matrice 200 owner right now. As I mentioned a couple of times before, you know, make sure you get those firmware updates done. You need to do it with pairs of batteries, so 2 at a time. And no matter if you've got 2 or 200 batteries, you need to update the firmware on all of them. And then both the CAA and DJI have said, once you've updated the firmware, you then need to go and do test flights with every single pair of batteries as well. So point 1, update your batteries in pairs. It's specifically relating to the TB50 and the TB55. You need to update the firmware in pairs using the DJI Assistant software, which if you don't have already, you can get for Windows PCs and Mac. You need to update the firmware in pairs. You then need to move on to point 2, which is test those updated batteries out. Make sure that they are updated in the right way and they're not malfunctioning anymore. Make sure you do that in a very safe environment, ensuring that perhaps on this occasion you're not just the standard kind of distance from any third parties that are not interested in what you're doing and not part of what you're doing. I would perhaps double the distance that you need to be away from them, if not further, just in case anything, God forbid, should happen. And point 3, obviously I've just been bleating on about this one. If you don't have insurance, I would certainly make sure you've got some cover in place before you take your Matrice 200 out, just because, if after you've updated the firmware anything else should go wrong, at the end of the day it's software, so glitches can happen. You want to make sure that if your quad comes flying out of the sky, you're going to be able to get it repaired or replacement and so on and so forth. So yeah, make sure you're covered as well. Now the DJI Assistant software, I'll put a link in the YouTube description as well, so that you can link directly to that. It's DJI Assistant 2. You need to download it, install it, and then run the update with the batteries. Like I said, you need to do it in pairs. Plugging the batteries into the aircraft and running the DJI Assistant 2 each time will do the trick. Now, let's see what else is being said around the news circuit. I believe that there's another police force. I'm not sure if it's Kent Police. It may well be Kent Police that have also grounded their Matrice 200s. Naturally, they're going to want to get their Matrice 200s updated before they have any further operations. Naturally, if you're using your Matrice 200s for anything search and rescue wise, or well, I suppose in any operation, any kind of project, you're going to want to make sure that you get these updates done ASAP, and certainly before you get into any complex work. So the safety notice, which currently applies to operators of the DJI Matrice 200, it basically states that there's been a small number of incidents reported where the aircraft has suffered a complete loss of power. Obviously, the indication with the drone at the time is that there's sufficient battery remaining, and then in each case it's resulted in the aircraft just falling directly to the ground. And like I said before, I don't know how much damage has been done. I suppose it depends on the current altitude they were at, and you know, what they've landed on, and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is a not so great story, to be fair, and I'm really glad right now that I don't own a Matrice 200. I'm interested to hear if any of you have suffered any kind of incident with this particular issue. Perhaps you've got a bit of a horror story where the drone hasn't survived, or perhaps you've got, you know, a better outcome story where you know, the worst has happened and perhaps it's dropped out of the sky, but you've managed to save it or repair it or whatever. You know, if it's whatever the story, I'd love to hear it. So if you want to get involved and get your story told on the podcast, then email podcast@dronezone.uk or hit us up on Instagram, which is @DroneZoneUK. Give us details of what's happened with yours, and you know, we'll certainly get it featured and give you a shout out in the next podcast. That's all from me on this particular episode. Thanks for listening. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button. I'm also interested in seeing any of your comments and, you know, feedback on the show so far. I'd just like to ask a simple question, and if you can give me some feedback on this before I release the next episode. I'm also going to run a poll for it on Instagram. Now, basically, the question I want to ask is, what are people interested in seeing? So, for example, on the next video podcast that I release, which will be hopefully tomorrow, I'm going to be going through some tutorials. What would you rather see? Would you rather see tutorials that are based on the controls in terms of the flight modes, or so the on-screen visuals naturally will be what you see on the screen of, you know, the phone or iPad, tablet, whatever that's plugged into your controller, or would you rather see some actual footage that's been shot and tutorials that are geared towards getting those shots? I'm happy to do either. I'm happy to do both. What would you rather see first? If it's the video tutorials on actually capturing footage, that'll give me a chance to showcase some video that I captured a little while ago in Sardinia. Stunning footage, really, really nice, and very different landscapes right around the island. So, like I said, that'll be really nice to watch. But equally important is, you know, flight modes and getting used to calibrating all the things that have got to be calibrated on your drone. And, you know, I can run through tutorials on that. In fact, like I said, I'm no doubt going to do that. But what do you want to see first? Let me know in the comments on YouTube, and, you know, hit us up on Instagram @DroneZoneUK. And once again, if there's anybody that wants to share any content with our audience, you can send it to podcast@DroneZone.uk, and obviously send it across to the Instagram feed as well. If you've got any, you know, great aerial photographs or aerial video clips, send them over and get them showcased on the video podcast, and get yourself some kind of, you know, publicity. If you want a shout out for your drone company, or maybe just for your personal feed, then, you know, send us your content. We'll certainly get it featured and give you a shout out, and, you know, make sure that your audience is growing as well as ours. So that's all for today, folks. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.